Hi everyone, today we are discussing factoring trinomials where the leading coefficient a is greater than 1. Okay, so last time we talked about creating a factor table and finding factors. We're going to do the same thing today, other then we have to take it one step further. Okay, so just to remind people, these are our steps. So since today this leading coefficient is greater than 1, this step is different. So the first thing is to factor out a GCF if we have it. We don't have a GCF for this one. Now look at number 2, create a factor table for AC. So what they're talking about is taking A, which is that leading coefficient, C, which is the constant, and multiplying them together. So here in our problem, where we have 2x squared plus x minus 6, 2 is our leading coefficient, negative 6 is our constant on the back, which is our C. We're going to multiply those together, and we're going to come up with negative 12 here. So what we want to do is find factors of negative 12. All right, so here I've created the entire table. So you can see negative 1 times 12, negative 2 times 6, negative 3 times 4, and then we just flip those signs: 1 times negative 12, 2 times negative 6, and 3 times negative 4. So I am looking for where they add up to 1. Remember, there is a 1 here, even though it's not written. So where does it add up to 1? Okay, and that is if I chose negative 3 and positive 4. Okay, now before we would say, hey, those are our answers, but that's not true this time. We now have to take those answers, those negative 3 and positive 4s, and we're going to put it back into our equation. Okay, so we are focused right here on the right side of the screen. Okay, this was my original. We found the negative 3 and positive 4. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace the positive x with negative 3 and positive 4. Okay. And now we're going to do what's called grouping. So what happens here is I take these two groups and I split these in half. So they form two nice groups here. So I take the first two, 2x squared minus 3x, I make that a group, and then the positive 4x minus 6, I make that a group. And now we're going to factor out the GCF for each group. So in the first section, 2x squared minus 3x, my GCF is just x. In the positive 4x minus 6 group, my GCF is 2. And now we have to factor that out of each group. So you can see that I took the x and I placed it out front. Okay, and then I need to come up with what's remaining. So from 2x squared and I divide by an x, I get 2x. Or in other words, x times what gives me 2x squared? X times 2x gives me 2x squared. Same thing here. X times what gives me negative 3x up here? X times negative 3. Okay, so if you remembered from last time, we actually came through and we divided by that GCF. If you want to do that, you can do it this way too. Okay, so here in the second half, positive 4 divided by 2 gave me 2 and an x. Negative 6 divided by 2 gave me negative 3. Okay, at this point, I now see I have another GCF here, which is the 2x minus 3. So here, this GCF of 2x minus 3 comes out, and that means I am left with x and positive 2, and they come together to form the other binomial. Okay, this is called the grouping method. So once again, we replaced the center bx term with the factors we found from our factor table. Okay, we group them together. We factored out the GCF, so we found the GCF and then factored it out. And then we wrote our two new terms. Okay. Now, if we don't like the grouping method, we can also do the box method for those of you who like the box method. So we're starting at the same point. We're starting with that -3 and 4 that we found. And here I've drawn a box of where things go. So in the top left box, that's going to be our ax squared from the original. So the 2x squared still goes in the very first box. The two new values that I found, the -3 and the 4, go here in the next two boxes. It doesn't matter where you put them. They're on the diagonal. And then my constant goes in the bottom corner. So now what we're going to do is we're going to factor out the GCF from each row and from each column. So I'm going to look at this first row and say, well, what's the GCF from that row? Well, we only have an x, so I pulled out x here. Okay, I look at the second row. What's the GCF here? Okay, well, that is only a 2. So I put +2. You never want to put just regular 2. You're going to put a positive or negative. This is positive. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing for the column. 2x squared and 4x. Well, from the numbers, the most I could pull out is 2. From x's, the most I can pull out is one of the x's, so I have 2x. And then when I look at the second column, I have a -3 and a -6. So I can take the -3. I want to pull the negative because the negative is out front. So now here are my new factors. My final answers are sitting right here on the sides and the top, x plus 2 and 2x minus 3, okay, and that is my answer. So this is a little easier sometimes, okay, it's a little easier sometimes, so that's why the smiley face is there. It's not as much trouble, doesn't seem to be as detailed as doing it with the grouping method. Okay, but you're free to do either method that you like. Okay, so we're going to try one more. Okay, so here we go. We've got 4x squared minus 4x minus 15. So the first thing we have to do is do our AC, which is 4 times -15, which is -60. So I need to do the factors now of -60. So I've got -60. They have to multiply to -60, and then they have to add to -4. Well, instead of writing them all out because there's a lot, let's just use something that I see right off the bat. Well, what about 6 times 10? Okay, -6 times 10. That's -60, but that doesn't add up to -4, it adds up to +4. So let's try rearranging the signs. What about 6 times -10? So +6 minus 10, that does give me -4. So here, right here, that's going to replace this -4. Okay, so we're going to come down and we're going to rewrite 4x squared, and instead of writing the -4x this time, I'm going to write my new factors that I just found. Plus 6x minus 10x, and then we have minus 15. Okay, and now we're just going to group them together. Okay, we're just going to split them up here, two sections. Okay, the GCF for 4x squared plus 6x, the GCF is going to be 2x, so we're going to bring that out front. And what am I left with? Okay, so I would be left with 2x plus 3. And then we want to double check, multiply it back through. 2x times 2x is 4x squared. 2x times positive 3 is positive 6x. Okay, so I did that right. Now we're going to do the same thing with the second one. We're going to pull the GCF out here. Okay, that GCF, we're going to pull a negative because it's out front. But here we're going to pull 5. 5 is going to be the GCF. So negative 5. Okay, so that would give me 2x. And to get negative 15, I need a positive 3. And I'm going to double check here. Negative 5 times 2x is negative 10x. Negative 5 times positive 3 is negative 15. And what we notice is that we now have these two binomials. They're exactly the same. So we are going to pull those right out as a GCF, and that leaves me the 2x and the minus 5. Okay, so there are steps in here that I didn't write down. I just kind of followed the rules when factoring these out. If you had to write all those down, then it gets extremely lengthy. So let's do the same problem doing the box method. Okay, we're still dealing with this same problem. We would still go in and do the AC method. Okay, so I need factors of negative 60, and they have to add to negative 4. So none of this changes. This is all the same. All right, we're going to assume that I did negative or 6 and negative 10, positive 6 minus 10. Okay, so that's looking good. Okay, so all of that stays the same. So the difference now is when I put it in the box. The 4x squared goes in the top corner. And now this is where the 6 and the 10 come from. Positive 6x, negative 10x. So that goes right into the table here. And then the minus 15 comes on the back end. And now we're going to take and we're going to factor out the GCFs for every row and every column. So for the first row, the GCF between 4 and 6 is a 2. And from x squared and x is an x. Okay, from the bottom row, we're going to take a negative because it's out front. The GCF from 10 and 15 is a 5, and we cannot take an x because there's no x on the 15. Okay, now we're going to do the column. 4 and negative 10 has a GCF of 2, and then x squared and x has a GCF of x. 6 and 15 has a GCF of positive 3, so you want to make sure you put the positive there, and we cannot take an x. So you see here we have 2x minus 5 and 2x plus 3, and they are the exact same answers, just done differently. So it all boils down to whether you are more comfortable with the grouping method or whether you're more comfortable with the box method.